The morning had that kind of golden calm you only find in a well-behaved suburb. Sunlight filtered through the oak tree out front, splintering into shifting shadows across the driveway. My Great Dane, Rex, was lying there on the lawn, gnawing lazily at an old rope toy like he had no deadline in the world. Just the hum of birdsong, the breeze combing through the hedges, and the faint scent of cut grass still hanging in the air. It was the sort of morning that made you believe this life, this street, this neighborhood was exactly what peace was supposed to look like. I sipped my coffee and let the moment soak in. I didn't realize peace had an expiration date. Her name was Karen Whitmore, and the second I saw her striding down the sidewalk, heels snapping like a metronome of dread, I knew it was over. Everyone in Willow Creek felt it when she appeared. Like the temperature dropped a few degrees. Like the rules had just tightened their grip. Karen wasn't just the head of the HOA. She was its enforcer, high priestess, and executioner all rolled into one. Tall, rigid posture, a jaw like iron, and blonde hair shellacked into a helmet that had never known wind. She didn't walk, she invaded. Her eyes scanned properties like searchlights, sniffing out violations with a sixth sense for disorder. Her weapon of choice wasn't a clipboard. It was a rolled-up stack of bylaws, highlighted and tabbed for quick access. And now she was on my lawn. She didn't knock, didn't greet, just stopped dead at the edge of my yard. Gaze locked on Rex like he was a war criminal sunbathing on enemy turf. "You need to get rid of that creature," she snapped, her voice brittle enough to cut steel. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She pointed at Rex with a perfectly manicured nail. He had just flopped onto his back, tongue lolling out, the picture of canine serenity. "That dog violates HOA code. Sections 4.2a and 7.5c. Pet size and aesthetic harmony. He's too big. He's a hazard. And frankly, he clashes with your landscaping." I set my coffee down. "He's a dog, not a decorative statue." Karen's lips thinned. "Appearances can be deceiving. He's a menace." "A menace," I said. "He hasn't even barked. He's literally lying in the sun." She thrust the papers toward me like a court summons. "You have 1 week to comply." "Comply with what, exactly?" "Rehome him. Permanently." Her eyes held no empathy, only control. Control and a disturbing sense of satisfaction. I didn't take the papers. Instead, I forced my voice to stay calm. "I'll consider it." It was a lie, of course. A stall. But I needed time. Karen was a master at baiting people into emotional responses, and I wasn't about to give her that win. She smiled, smug, triumphant, and turned away. Her heels clicked down the pavement like a countdown ticking toward something I hadn't yet imagined. What I didn't know then, what no one could have known, was that this wasn't about Rex at all. It wasn't even about the HOA. This was the first domino. The first move in a game I didn't realize I was playing. Karen had drawn her line in the sand, and from that moment on, the war had begun. A week, that's what she gave me. 7 days to comply or face whatever vague HOA consequences Karen Whitmore thought she could unleash. I didn't know what those would be, but I had the distinct feeling they wouldn't be limited to passive-aggressive emails. The thing about Karen was, she didn't let things go. Ever. She wasn't just enforcing HOA codes. She was on a mission to reshape the neighborhood into a tight, sanitized image of perfection she could control. And Rex was an offense to that image. Started small, petty, but relentless. The fence was the first official strike. I got an email from the HOA filled with jargon so thick it might as well have been a legal brief. It demanded I repaint my fence. Apparently, weathered cedar was no longer compliant with the community's approved color palette. I was given 72 hours to correct this egregious violation. It was just a fence. A brown, wooden fence. But I spent the weekend repainting it, just slightly darker than before. Under the paranoid feeling that Karen was watching me through her blinds, savoring every brushstroke like it was a confession of guilt. Next came the garden. Another notice. This one complaining about the height of my rose bushes, allegedly blocking the sidewalk view and, get this, creating a potential hiding spot for unsavory characters. Unsavory characters? It was a rose garden. Still, I trimmed the bushes down, sacrificing their full blooms and elegance. Every cut felt like I was giving something up, bit by bit, inch by inch. Then came the trash can incident. I'd taken it out early one afternoon, maybe 4 hours ahead of pickup. That's when I found Karen standing next to it, arms crossed like she was guarding state secrets. "This is unacceptable," she said, lifting a copy of the HOA guidelines as if it were the Constitution itself. Section 9.1b. Receptacles may not be placed curbside prior to 6 a.m. on collection day. "It's 3 p.m., I replied calmly. "I was just about to bring it back in." "Ignorance," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "is no excuse." She folded the paper with surgical precision. "Consider this a formal warning." And then the animal control visit. A quiet knock on the door. Polite man in uniform. "We received a complaint about a dangerous dog at this address," he said, glancing at the sun-drenched porch where Rex was peacefully napping. "That one?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. The officer scratched Rex behind the ears. "He doesn't look very dangerous." "He's not," I said flatly. "Someone's trying to make trouble." Across the street, I caught the curtain in Karen's window twitch just enough for me to know. The officer left with an apologetic smile and no further questions. And that was it. Something shifted in me. The dread. The quiet anxiety that had been building like humidity before a storm was gone. In its place, a steady, rising fire. This wasn't about dogs. This wasn't about fences or flowers or garbage bins. Karen was playing a game, but she didn't know I knew how to play too. The harassment was one thing, but it was the little things, the subtle ones, that started tugging at a deeper instinct. Unmarked vans that sometimes showed up late at night. Whispers between neighbors that stopped the moment I walked by. The strange renovations on Karen's house. Expensive ones, despite her public complaints about rising HOA dues. Something wasn't adding up. So I did what I do best. I paid attention. I dug in. I researched everything I could find about the HOA, about Karen, about the money trail. And what I found wasn't just unsettling. It was the first crack in a much darker truth. I don't know what I expected to find when I started digging. Maybe I just needed to feel like I had some control again, like I wasn't just waiting around for Karen to invent a new HOA offense. But the more I uncovered, the less this looked like petty suburban drama, and the more it started to look like a cover-up. The HOA's financial records were public, to a point. I found them online after a few hours of poking around. Most of it was standard operating stuff, maintenance, landscaping, common area repairs. But then there were the red flags. Repeated miscellaneous expenses with large sums of money and no explanations. Tens of thousands of dollars vanishing into vague labels and dead-end entries. The more I dug, the more I noticed things that didn't sit right. Karen's name popped up more than once, tied to these mystery expenses. There was also a name I hadn't seen before, Daniel Whitmore. Her husband, or ex-husband as it turned out. A few buried local news stories linked him to a small embezzlement scandal years ago. Charges were dropped, but his reputation never recovered. He disappeared not long after. Then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Gable invited me in for tea. She was Karen's neighbor, an older woman who kept to herself. Sweet, quiet, one of those grandmothers who always seemed to know more than they let on. I'd never spoken to her beyond the occasional wave across the street, but that day she waved me over with a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. "I've seen what she's been doing to you," she said once we sat. Her hands trembled as she poured tea, but her voice didn't. "You don't deserve it." I leaned in, cautious but curious. "Why does she hate me so much?" "She doesn't hate you," Mrs. Gable said, sighing. "She's afraid." And then she told me the story. Years ago, Karen had a daughter, a little girl named Sophie. Sweet, bright, full of life. One day, a stray dog wandered into their yard. Karen thought it was harmless until it wasn't. The attack was sudden, brutal. Sophie didn't survive. She was never the same after that, Mrs. Gable said, her voice cracking. She blamed herself. And the dog. And every dog after that. I sat there, stunned, the weight of the story sinking in. She changed, she continued. She needed control, structure. The HOA gave her that. I wanted to feel sympathy, and maybe I did for a moment. But grief doesn't justify tyranny. Her trauma didn't give her the right to make everyone else suffer. She never talks about it, Mrs. Gable added. I think, in her mind, if she can make the world perfect, safe, then maybe it'll undo what happened. I left with a storm of thoughts swirling in my head. I didn't know what to do with that kind of pain. But I knew one thing. Rex wasn't the enemy. He wasn't a symbol of tragedy. He was the target of misplaced vengeance. And then, the unthinkable happened. I came home one evening, and the gate to my backyard was wide open. I called for Rex. No answer. I ran through the yard, the street, the park, calling his name until my voice cracked. He was gone. Vanished. Then I saw the envelope tucked under my doormat. Inside, a single line typed in all caps. We have your dog. Follow the rules or you'll never see him again. My hands went numb. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was a threat. I called the police, filed the report, did everything by the book. But I already knew what they would say. No proof, no suspect, no leads. But I had a lead. An old warehouse just outside of town. One Karen's husband reportedly used for some questionable business before he vanished. It was abandoned now, boarded up and forgotten. But I remembered the van. The same one I'd seen parked across the street late at night. It was a long shot, but I had no choice. I grabbed my keys. I wasn't calling anyone. I was going in. The drive to the warehouse felt endless. My grip tightened on the wheel, jaw clenched hard enough to ache. The rational part of me knew this was stupid, reckless, even. But I couldn't sit around and wait. Not when Rex was out there. Not when I had a gut-deep certainty that Karen, or someone tied to her, was behind it. The place looked as forgotten as I remembered. Weathered siding, broken signage, and weeds clawing up through the cracked asphalt. But what caught my eye was the van parked just off to the side. Same model, same faded paint. No plats. And two men. Big ones. The kind who looked like they'd flunked out of Muscle for Hire school but still knew how to throw a punch. They stood near the warehouse entrance, smoking like they had nowhere better to be. My stomach turned. No way I could go through the front. I circled the perimeter, staying low, until I found a side window with a broken pane. I pulled myself up and through, landing hard on a dusty concrete floor inside. It was dark, stale, silent. Then I heard it, a low whimper, faint but unmistakable. Rex? I whispered, my voice tight in my throat. I moved quietly toward the sound, stepping over old crates and discarded metal. My hand instinctively went to the concealed holster beneath my jacket. A habit I hadn't needed in years, but one that never really left me. The badge, the service, the field, it was all behind me. Until now. Rex was in the corner. Tied up, muzzle still, tail twitching in cautious recognition. When he saw me, he let out a soft, almost embarrassed groan, like he was apologizing for getting caught. I knelt to free him. That's when the door behind me creaked open. Well, a voice sneered. What do we have here? One of the men stepped inside, bathed in the weak light from the hallway. He grinned like a guy who thought he had the upper hand. Before I could react, Rex did. But not the way you'd expect. He lunged, not at the man, but at a sagging piece of exposed wiring hanging from the ceiling. He grabbed it and yanked it loose. Sparks rained down like fireworks. The lights died instantly, plunging us into total blackness. I moved on instinct. Years of training surged through me. I slipped left as the man charged, caught his arm, and flipped him hard to the floor. Another man burst in just as I got to my feet. I ducked his swing, drove a shoulder into his chest, and sent him crashing into a stack of crates. Rex, now free, circled behind them, growling low, calm and lethal. They didn't stand a chance. When the dust settled, both men were tied up with their own zip ties, groaning on the floor. I called the police, gave them the location, and stayed close to Rex until the sirens echoed in the distance. He leaned into me as I scratched behind his ear. "Good boy," I said softly. "You're not just a dog. You're a damn warhound." But even as the police took the men away, even as I gave my statement and felt the adrenaline fading from my veins, I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't some isolated act of desperation. This was organized, coordinated. Karen wasn't working alone. I made one call. "Mark," I said as soon as he picked up. "It's me. I need your help. And I need it now." Mark was law enforcement, a friend from a life I thought I'd left behind, someone who still trusted me, even after I'd walked away from the badge. I told him everything: the HOA complaints, the threats, the suspicious financial reports, the warehouse, the van, the thugs, and Karen. He didn't hesitate. "I always said there was something off about that neighborhood," he muttered. "I'll pull the threads. And don't worry, I'll keep this quiet until we're ready." "Also," I added, "about that animal control report? Yeah. Rex, he's no ordinary dog." Mark chuckled. "He's FBI? He's retired, like me, but still has his instincts." I gathered every piece of evidence I had.
Email, photo, log, HOA document.
I used my old credentials, ones I hadn't touched in years, to access a secure federal database. And what I found confirmed what I feared: shell corporations, money laundering fronts, and at the center of them all, Karen Whitmore. The self-appointed queen of the HOA wasn't just a control freak with a clipboard. She was the linchpin of a criminal enterprise, and she'd just made a very public mistake. Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting. Her tone in the memo was all fire and fury. "A resident has become a threat to our peaceful community," and I knew she was planning to make a show of it. Public takedown. Me front and center. But I had no intention of playing the villain in her little drama. Not this time. The community center was packed. Residents filled every seat, some clutching copies of HOA bylaws, others whispering nervously. Karen stood at the podium in her usual armor: pastel blouse, pearls, and that smug tilt of her chin. She looked like a woman about to drop the final hammer. "Neighbors," she began, her voice echoing through the speakers. "We have a problem, one that threatens everything we've worked so hard to protect." Her eyes locked on mine. "There is a resident among us who has repeatedly flouted the rules, endangered others, and..." That's when the doors burst open. 2 federal agents strode in, crisp suits, no-nonsense expressions. And right behind them, Mark. He nodded at me. I nodded back. "Karen Whitmore," one of the agents said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "You are under arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "What?" Karen shrieked. "This is a mistake. I'm the one protecting this community. You're being charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and money laundering." The agent continued, unmoved. "And for requesting the destruction of federal property." She blinked. "Federal, what are you?" Then his eyes flicked to Rex, seated calmly at my side. Rex, the retired K-9 unit. Rex, who'd once stood guard alongside presidents. Rex, who'd served this country with more honor than Karen could comprehend. "He's a decorated federal asset," I said, stepping forward. "And you tried to have him destroyed." Karen's mouth opened but no sound came. Her world was crumbling. "And there's more," Mark added grimly. "You weren't working alone." The silence sharpened. Mark looked around the room, then pointed at Mrs. Gable. Collective gasp. Someone dropped their coffee. The sweet old woman who'd made cookies for everyone, who'd poured me tea and spun tales of Karen's grief, wasn't just a bystander. She was the architect. Emails, offshore accounts, encrypted transfers, all traced back to her. Karen hadn't masterminded the operation. She'd been used, manipulated through guilt and grief. Mrs. Gable had pulled the strings, hidden in plain sight, letting Karen play the tyrant while she moved the money. As the agents cuffed them both, the illusion of Willow Creek cracked wide open. The HOA was suspended pending investigation. Every shady transaction, every manufactured complaint, every threat, exposed. The residents looked stunned, ashamed, relieved. Over the next few weeks, change swept through the neighborhood. A new, transparent HOA board was elected. The rules were revised, less tyrannical, more human. People smiled more. They waved again. They even stopped by to thank me. Some brought cookies. Others just wanted to pet Rex. But the peace this time felt real. I knew I wouldn't stay here forever. My old life, my real life, was calling. But I'd never forget what happened here. How easy it was for control to become tyranny. How silence and fear could let darkness bloom right in the middle of a perfect lawn. And how one dog, one loyal, oversized goofball, could expose it all. Rex and I sat on the porch that final morning. He rested his head on my foot, breathing slow and steady. The sun filtered through the oak tree just like it had that first day. The air smelled like grass and second chances. "You ready?" I asked. He didn't move, just gave one heavy sigh. The kind that said, "Where you go, I go." And that was enough. We stood together, not just as a man and his dog, but as partners, ready for whatever came next.